it's different, and every time it's exciting to see the Lord at work. So I'm blessed to be here again after quite a few changes in the schedule and so on, as you might know. But this is not important, but what the Lord is and does is the most important. I invite you to start with a psalm, to start to read a psalm, just to let our souls quiet down a bit. I don't know about you, but I'm after quite a few bumpy weeks, days, and busy schedule. But when Sabbath comes, we can rest. Actually, the Sabbath itself, it's the symbol of what God does for you when you can't do anything anymore. And when you give up in His arms. You know that picture, I'm sure you have it in German, some of you have seen it, where the poem goes that I walked in my dream on the beach and I saw the past of my life. And I saw 2 pairs of steps in the sand, but at some point where it was most difficult, I only saw 1 pair, and I said, Lord, why is it that you left me alone where it was the hardest? And the Lord said, no, those are my footsteps, not yours. I was carrying you in my arms. So sometimes we feel that way, and it's okay to let the Lord carry us. In fact, it's the best when we know He's carrying us all the time. But we just don't realize it until it becomes absolutely impossible to do one more thing by ourselves. And then we crash in His arms. Now, the title of today's message is What is Wrong with Today's Religion? What is wrong with the religion of our world? Of course, there are many wrong things in our religious world today, and we cannot possibly talk about all of them in a weekend or in a week, let alone in 1 hour. But we have to address some things, not for the sake of being negative, but for the sake of understanding what is wrong and how it has to be right. Because that's the mission of any reform, to show the wrong from right and to give the choice of the right thing to the people. So in order for us to be able to reform our lives, we have to understand what is right and what is wrong so we can differentiate. But let's read Psalm 46 for the beginning. Yes, Psalms 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very help present in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Through the waters thereof roar and be troubled, through the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations He had made in the earth. He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burned the chariots in the fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Now, as you can tell, this psalm is centering around what God is and what He does on the earth. And this is precisely a good point to start our meditation tonight, because worship, by its definition, is centering upon God. Worship is what we ought to do in God's presence. Now, it's hard to define worship from our normal life if we were in heaven, if we were to be in a sinless state, because we know that God's presence is everywhere. And if God's presence is everywhere and we can be aware of God's presence being with us, then almost everything we do becomes worship. Do you see the extension of the meaning? And then we don't have to be in church to worship, because through our very life, we worship God when we obey Him. We worship God when we follow Him. We worship God. But especially when we formally in a church, when we gather together to celebrate the hours of the Sabbath together and to enjoy God's word toward us, that becomes a special time of worship. And that is what generally is called religion. Now, what can be wrong with religion worse than when God is missing? Not that religion today has no God, but religion today might very well be called idolatry in many ways, because it has a false God. And it doesn't have Ashtaroth or Baal, as in the old ages of the time of the prophets. It has another God which is way more subtle to discover. What happened was that Satan saw that once the Christian era broke out, Christianity will enlighten the world in a few short years. And it did. But then he knew that Christianity has to be perverted in order to be stopped. Because by the sword, Christianity was only multiplied. And as you know, already the word was going that the blood of the Christians became a seed. And everywhere the Christians were slain by the Roman swords, their blood was just multiplying the faith. Because a faith worth dying for is definitely a faith worth living for. And people flocked to Christianity faster than the sword could kill them. So Satan scratched his head and realized he cannot stop Christianity by force. He has to allure it into something that will turn it away from their source of power. So by the 4th century, he realized to fight Christianity by the sword is useless. And he started to allure the leaders of the church, the bishops, to enjoy a little more comfort, a little more power, a little more gold. And that's how Christianity started to decay. And we know that Constantine played a very interesting role in history. He is a saint now in some of the churches. And he was a good politician. He realized that the Roman Empire is falling apart. And this enormous force that is shaking the Roman Empire for more than 3 centuries has to be used instead of defeated. So he turned around and declared Christianity official, lawful. But he asked the bishops to do him some favors too. And this is how the mixture between paganism and Christianity really took off rampantly. Because there were some mixtures before, but at this point where the bishops were allured with favors, the mixture became really, really complex. And all the known holidays and all the known idols of the Roman religions became Christians overnight. And everybody seemed to be happy with the idea. No, it wasn't easy for most Christians that were serious, but gold has changed the faith into dust. That's how it started. And I'm not going to talk about the Catholic Church today. That's not the purpose. Because what happened after 1,260 years of this kind of forceful religion, this time, humanity was tired of it, was ready to cast off both religion and authority. And because religion usually used politics, and politics used religion, the French Revolution was a good example of what rebellion can mean when it casts away both God and the king, both the authority of heaven and the authority of the state. So, of course, that was a false religion they were rebelling against. It wasn't a true God, it wasn't a true king that they were rebelling against. But when Darwin came with the idea of existence out of nowhere and origins without God, it was almost like a drop on a thirsty soul of humanity that gave them a way out of this tyrannic religion that the Dark Ages forced upon mankind. And philosophers tell us today that even if Darwin would have never come with the idea, somewhere, somebody would have invented it, because the need was so great to get out of this false religion that the the Dark Ages has brought upon humanity. So kings were slain, priests were thrown out, and religion went overboard. And suddenly we come to the Enlightenment. And the 18th and 19th centuries have already flourished after the Enlightenment centuries of the philosophers. And then we see all other kinds of social movements and all kinds of isms flourish in the European realm especially, and in the United States when it became a leading power in the world. But mainly think about the fact that slowly authority is undermined. And we could talk here about lots of ways in recent years authority has been undermined, but I would like to take an example, and I hope to be understood well. I do not want to hurt anybody, but this is a true example which has gone extremely far in the last 10 to 20 years, and you will understand what I'm talking about very soon. The Bible portrays the family as a patriarchal hierarchy, where, of course, both are created equal, but the functions of the partners in a family are different. And husbands are made to be the leaders, and the gospel goes so far to tell us that there is a hierarchy where God, the Father, is the head of Christ, and Christ is the head of the husband, and the husband is the head of his wife. And you know all these passages. Paul talks about it in Corinthians and in his letter toward Timotheus, and then even Peter talks about it. And we see it through the gospel. Now that's the classical patriarchal image of the family that we find in the Old Testament. And there were abuses, and there is always something that can go wrong with everything God creates. But that does not mean that God has made a mistake. It's as Satan tries to destroy what God has made that problems appear. But once the feminist movement started in the 18th and 19th centuries, you discover that women want to be equal. Now, they were equal. They're also different. Nobody said they were not equal, except, of course, for the abuses. But we see a society that proclaims that the ladies can drive the tractor, they can have a job, they can raise kids without fathers, and all kinds of abnormal situations. And now, of course, because they have a job, they have to take care of the home as well, and suddenly we discover they work more than men. But you see, there is a dynamics in this, and underlying everything, there is a clear layer of rebellion that's going on. Not necessarily with the ladies, because they have been taught into this. There is somebody behind that pulls the strings. But what I'm saying is, ladies have lost a lot of their happiness through this, because every time the order of God is disturbed, happiness is out the window. For example, if man does not know how to find God as the head of his life, he won't be happy. He won't be happy because he cannot be happy without God as the head of his life. And as well, if the lady cannot trust her husband for the decision process, understandable that she is a helper, a helpmeet that can always advise, and it's advisable to take the lady's advice. So it's nothing wrong with consulting, but the final power of decision has been given to man just because he's able to think more rational, in most cases, of course, than ladies, which are more affectionate and are prepared better to take care of the children. So if this order is disturbed, what happens is that both ladies and gentlemen are suffering, and the children are suffering, and the order of God is destroyed. And now, of course, we got to the extreme cases of all kinds of aberrations that are not actually families anymore. But I'm just giving this example of what happened with the status of the lady that is made to be part of the family unit, which is along and together with her husband. And this disturbance produces a lack of peace in both her and her husband, and creates a authority switch. Authority is disturbed. Now, this is all created so that God's authority is undermined. And all these changes in history have been their destiny in the enemy's mind was to destroy our respect and submission toward God. Because if somebody, it is a known fact today that if somebody is raised up with a disturbed order in his family and does not know what a loving father means and a kind mother, where the father is the head of the household and the mother is a loving helpmeet, then he will never be able to easily relate to God. Of course, we can all learn from mistakes, and we can all develop abilities we have not been taught in the childhood, but it's much harder to know what a loving God is if you didn't have a loving father. It's much harder to understand what a caring God is if your mother was not there to care for you. So you understand, through the centuries, since Christ left, the whole crowd of evil angels have prepared a crisis where nobody really understands God correctly anymore. And this crisis is today. And the biggest problem we have is the problem of authority. Authority has been undermined, and society is upside down when it comes to authority. Now, you know what one of the most difficult jobs is in the Western society? It's not yet paid as it should be, because it becomes more and more one of the worst paid jobs, especially in the last 20 years, since the emerging of the cell phones and all kinds of stuff. Teaching. Teaching in grade school becomes a nightmare by the day. And many people just give up teaching. They say, I'm sorry, I can't make it anymore. Classes are turned into smaller and smaller groups so they can be managed. But basically the young generation is a generation that has almost zero foundation when it comes to respect, authority, and if I might use the word submission, let alone the word obedience, because then we go into almost inexistent terms. So because of this, teaching as a trade becomes an impossible job, because you have to do with kids that don't know how to submit, and they don't know how to control themselves. But coming back to religion, we are dealing with a religion that has a problem with the place of God. God in worship has to be the center. And we have assisted to a commercialization of religion in the last years, where we have turned everything, just as the Western society teaches us, we have turned everything around the needs of man, the needs of women and men, of course, of people. And we have started with religion from man, from his needs, and we came back around to the man again. And we discovered that now, when you start preaching, you have to see what people need, how they feel, what do you want them to feel, and you wonder, where is God in all this? When you read the Bible, things are different. People's feelings are not important. The truth is important. What is real is important. What is happening, the truth that is objective, outside of us, outside of our feelings, that is what the Bible is focusing on, not on feelings and of people and on so on, because then we, at these last 50 years, we have assisted at the degradation of the concept of truth. And people start asking, is there such thing as truth anymore? Or is truth just what I think it's true for me, and what is true for me is not true for you, and so we cannot talk about truth anymore, period. Do you see? All this is just the fruit that grew on the tree of rebellion. And the tree of rebellion, of course, started to grow in heaven, and it was just moved on the earth because we have accepted it here by the mistake we did in the Garden of Eden. But now we see what a society where God has not necessarily disappeared means, but where God has been replaced with us. Humans are today God. And we don't realize it because it's well masked, but this is what really happens in our religion. And not only so, it's not only the matter of respect and authority, but it is actually any kind of hierarchy that we hate. There is a movie that's made, it's called Time Changer. I don't know if you ever saw it. It's a Christian movie, and I don't usually look at movies, but I worked in media quite a bit, and we had quite a collection of Christian movies. And this movie shows a seminary in the 18 or 1900s, and there was a discussion about teaching ethics without God. And in a seminary, some of the older teachers were opposing the idea. How can we talk about ethics, how to behave, how to be nice in society without mentioning God? And some newer teachers say, no. We should be able to teach the students how to behave even if we do not mention God. And then the story goes that one of these younger teachers was able to be transported 70 or 100 years in the future. And he saw our society. And then he sees how people behave, and he wonders, what is wrong? I mean, things are terribly different, obviously, after 100 years from the time they were living. And then he realizes that basically they started to do movies for the sake of educating people, but without God. And then we started with educating through movies, right? That's why movies were created, to educate, and TV and everything. And we end up with just pure entertainment. And movies are today known to be just entertainment, because once God is taken out of somebody's life, you cannot educate. I mean, the main point in the whole movie is when two ladies talk about doing something together that the parents should not know, and this guy that came from 100 years earlier just listens and is shocked, and he says, you should not do such things, ladies. And they turned and said, they told him, says who? And he says who? God says. He has to answer his question, and then he's transported back, and he apologizes that, I'm sorry, there is no such a thing as ethics without God. With no God, everything falls apart. The problem today is that religion has not yet fallen apart, but in a sense, we have no more religion once God is gone from the center of our worship. And once our needs are the center, once our feelings are the center, then this is not religion. This is anything else but no religion. And this is happening a lot. Look at Christmas. It's coming next week. What is left of Christmas? It's a big X because Christ is out, and then it's a mess. right? It's a mess because we are left without Christ. And the biggest problem, technically speaking, with celebrating Christmas is that once you accept to talk about Christ's birth around 25th of December, you will be ashamed to talk about it the rest of the year. You realize that if you sing about Christ's birth any other time, you think it's anachronic. You think, hello, it's not Christmas. But who said that we can talk or sing about this only in the second part of December? You see, that's a big problem. It's not talking about or singing about it in the second part of December. It's not talking about it the rest of the year. And that's makes Christmas so dangerous, because suddenly you isolate the whole idea of incarnation for 2 weeks of the year, when it's a subject you should talk 52 weeks every year. Now, getting back to our story. The Bible tells us that God is God. And with or without our consent, He will remain, He was, He is, and He will remain God. And that is a beautiful, a peaceful, it gives a feeling of stability. It's not only a feeling, it gives the only form of stability to the whole universe. Let me ask you something. Would you like to be the boss in your company? Just suddenly, there is no boss. As you go next week or January back to work, there is no boss. What if they would say, well, there is no more boss, so you are the boss? And they will point to you. Is it going to be comfortable? Suddenly you start scratching your head and say, well, I wasn't the boss here. I don't know how to run this place. It's not going to be easy. Or you go home and the father is gone, and you suddenly have to take the place of the head. Or you go to church and suddenly there is no leadership and you have to take the place. Those are not happy feelings, because suddenly you feel the weight of the responsibility that does not belong to you. Now, in real terms, this is going to not be probably the best question, but in real terms, what about you being God? You being God? How do you feel about the thought? It's ugly, right? God? No way. I'm not God. God is God. I'm not God. But in a sense, in many ways, this is exactly, precisely what society has taught us. That we are God. We, because everything turns around us, we can dictate what we should eat, what we should wear, what we should sing, what our churches look like, our worship. At the point where humans became the center of religion. And that's where everything goes down the slope. Why am I mentioning these things? Because sooner or later, you will discover you are going against the current if you keep reading your Bible. Sooner or later, you are going to discover that this world does not agree anymore with the Bible. And that if you have to agree with the world, you cannot agree with the Bible at the same time. So we have to learn how to think based on the Bible, not based on ourselves, because that's another form. I mean, there are many forms for this idling of self. And the fact that people have 2 or 3 opinions today doesn't matter, as long as they do not agree with the Bible. As long as they don't worship the true God, Satan does care less if they go one way or the other, on one extreme or the other. But what is happening today, it's fast showing the results of the acceptance on this earth of the rebellion that started in heaven. And the rebellion is everywhere, although it has so many shapes. And some people are just playing classic, but in their heart are still worshiping self. And basically, without God, this is the bottom line. Without God helping us out, we have no chance of running away from worshiping self. I'll repeat this. Without God working for us, we have basically no way to running away from worshiping self. Because what happens is sin has made us blind. And once sin enters somebody's system of thinking, you're going to turn toward yourself. And instead of worshiping Him who is the Creator, you start worshiping yourself. And yes, the Bible talks about, and Jesus Himself talked about people that were giving glory one to another. And there is such a point where we can glorify or respect one another because there are advantages to it, you see. But without the Holy Spirit helping us out, we will never be able to escape self-worship at some degree. And this is the bottom line. We either let God save us from this pit, or there is no way out. But the beautiful part is every time somebody humbles himself and asks the Lord for help, asks the Lord to reorganize things in our lives as they were in the beginning, He is working, He is intervening. His creative hand is seen again at work. And the result is always beautiful. That's why I was enjoying to read the psalm. And actually I had a bunch of verses, all these things that I've told you about, Paul and Peter talking about the family and the right way husband should treat his wife, and wives should respect their husband. You know that husbands are told to love their wives, and the wives are never told to love their husbands because they do it naturally anyway. They are told to respect their husbands because that's what man needs, respect. And the ladies, they need to be loved, to be cherished. And the biggest sin in a family is trying to control each other. And some interpreters even talk about Genesis 3, where sin started with the desire of Eve to control her husband into sinning, to manipulate him to be united with her even when she was not united with him in obedience. You see, there are many faces to sin, but there is a big truth here. The family, the human family, was conquered first by division. And then it came down piece by piece. First Eve, and then Adam. If it's going to be saved, it has to be saved together, in unity. Now I understand there are many people here that never had a good family, and probably on this side of eternity will never do. And that does not change the rule. We have to know what is right, and if we cannot have it on this earth, that's not our problem. But we have to accept the healing hand of our Father. I wonder if anybody has a good family in this time and age, although I still believe God gave me a good wife, but probably I'm not the best husband. Maybe things can always be improved. What I'm just trying to tell you is that God's order, both in worshiping Him and in our relationships between us, are always governed by respect and by love. In the competition system, in the kingdom of Satan, they are governed by force and by the rule of who is stronger. And then, of course, you can be stronger with other things than physical force. You can be stronger with what men usually boast today, which is who is smarter. And we play the smartest many times and in many ways as men. And one thing that I am detesting is when worship is turned into who is smarter, who is preaching nicer, because of course preaching can be, of course it shouldn't be, but it can be a show of who is smarter here. Who is the smartest preacher that can bring such ideas from the texts and from the Bible that everybody will say, I never thought of such thing. And then you end up going home and you think, man, this preacher is really smart. Yeah, he got some things out of there that I never imagined. My question is, where is God in all this? Where is God? You see, we are always leaning toward self if God is not in the middle. That's why we have to at least pray about it, mention it openly, and ask God to intervene. This is what we can do, and the rest He will do. But if this world will be left to itself, we will end up excluding God totally from our lives, and certainly from our religion. Let's ask God to take back His place both in our lives, in our families, and implicitly in our religion. It is His joy to be God for us, because God means to carry us, to keep us, to be responsible for His creation to the end, all the way to the end. How does one of those verses say that I was looking for? Be still and know that I am God. You don't have to play God. You don't have to stress yourself out because you're playing God, obviously, when you are controlling your own life. No, let me be God for you. And then everything starts to fall in place naturally. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. If you would take time to make a list by reading the book of Revelation, you will discover something very, very interesting. The book of Revelation, beside being a book of prophecies and of the war between Christ and his enemies on the earth, the book of Revelation is a book of praises, of hymns. And you will find innumerable hymns in Revelation where the hosts of heaven, where the 24 elders, where the angels, where the beings on the earth, or in different stages, of course, of the development of the book of Revelation, you will find them glorifying God with such words that are rarely observed elsewhere in the Bible at such intensity. Why? Because Revelation is a book that shows us the outcome, the end, how things will turn out. And that has to do with replacing God at the center of every worship that is happening both on earth, in heaven, and everywhere in the universe. It's so beautiful. It's so peaceful, and both peaceful and exalting at the same time. It helps us. It gives us healing. It gives us rest to know that He holds not only the earth, but my life as well. Let God be God for us again, and this will bring us a lot of good things to our souls. Let us read in the end at least one or two of these songs of Revelation. It's so beautiful, and it gives us a foretaste of heaven when we hear how these angels are crying and proclaiming God's sovereign power and authority, and not because they have to, not because it's Sunday at 11 o'clock and they happen to be in the choir. No, but you know what the Bible also tells us? That in the presence of God is the only true joy and happiness in the whole universe. And I think angels cannot wait to take their turn around the throne of God, because that is the place where the biggest joy happens. That is the center of the universe, and being present there and being able to worship God is the biggest exaltment of the duties. They can't wait to get to see God again after they fulfill their mission. And listen to what they say. Just for example, chapter 4 of Revelation is a collection of 2 or 3 hymns like this. Verse, I guess before some more, but verse 8, for example, the 24 beings say, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come." And when those beasts gave glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who lived forever and ever, the 24 elders fell down before him and sat on the throne and worshipped him that liveth forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created." Think about this. The whole universe was created by God and is his. It belongs to him because he has created matter to start with. We don't have the time now anymore to go into the relationship between energy and matter. You know that energy creates matter because we humans have discovered that there are ways to transform matter in energy. And that is basically what atomic research has done, where it's the easiest form to create energy by transforming a little tiny special kind of matter into energy when you can get to the core of the matter. But imagine the creation is the reverse of the atomic center, the atomic units. It creates matter out of God's energy. God is energy, and he creates matter whenever he wants to. He has no problem with this. We reversed and created a little bit of energy out of very, very little matter that disappears in the process. So what happens is easy. God has created everything, and he keeps creating, and he can create forever. He has no problem doing that. The problem is when some creation does not recognize God as being God anymore. Then the disturbance of sin happen. And we are at a point where this disturbance will end very, very soon. But it cannot end until there are people that can admit again that God is God. And with this, God will have a proof, even on this earth, before everybody, and can call everybody to him again, through the few that know who he is. Let's be part of it. Let's ask him to make us part of that group that knows who God really is in our personal lives, in our families, in our churches. Then he can enlighten the whole world, as Revelation 18 says, and he will come back to cleanse the earth of sin. Amen.